Hello, everyone. Welcome to OTT Question Time. My name is Koza Kanji. I'm the editor of Forde Professional. This week, we are talking about whether OTT UI and UX is now fully evolved. And joining me on the panel for this conversation are Fabian, if we can start with you, please.
Hi, so I'm Fabian. I'm the director and founder of W12 Studios. We're a digital design agency based here in London, focusing on media entertainment. We've done a lot of work on TV. Prior to W12, I was at the BBC, where I not only worked on the early versions of the iPlayer, but also looked after what they call all the real-time products, so news, sport, and London 2012 Olympics.
Thank you, Fabian. Steve.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Forde. I'm Director of Digital Products at ITV. So I look after ITV Hub, ITV Hub Plus, all the program apps that you kind of all play along to our wonderful shows, and all the kind of websites as well that support the show. So I've been at ITV for the last 5 years. I launched the ITV Hub when I first arrived, and before that I was at Channel 4 for 10 years, where I looked after marketing and data for OD, which became All 4.
Thanks, Steve. And Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Williams. I'm co-founder and CEO of Ostmodern. We're also a digital design agency that specializes in video-centric product design. And we've been running for about 15 years. Prior to that, I worked at an agency whose main client was Channel 4, so that crossed paths with Steve back in those days. And then prior to that, I was also at the BBC from around 2000, working on a lot of the early core kind of application stuff at the BBC.
Thanks, Tom. And actually, I mean, let's stay with you because, as you say, you and Steve know each other for a long time, and you were there back at the beginning of 4OD, right, in 2006?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So what was the sort of thought process at the time about building that first iteration of that Vault service? Because I remember it clearly. I was working at the Racing Post newspaper, getting horse racing live, as in catch up and live horse racing onto the internet. So I remember going through a similar process there. But 4OD, I was such a nerd. I was super excited about downloading the desktop app when it first came out. Yeah. So can you sort of give us a little sort of potted history and what was it like back then?
Yeah, I mean, we'd been working with Channel 4 for a while, and when they approached us to do that project, at the time they'd kind of split various aspects of the work streams up into different things like visual design, user experience, the technical side of things. And yeah, for us it was fascinating, partly because at the time my interest was very much in application kind of utility design for stuff, where previously a lot of the web design stuff had been quite kind of micrositey and marketing led, and this was actually something useful that people would use, you know, day to day, and there weren't many products like that on the web at the time. I think the main thing I remember really was that there weren't many things to look at as reference points at the time. So, you know, Sky, the original Sky player launched around the same time, so that was the other first long form video platform that made it into the market around that time. YouTube did exist, but obviously, you know, YouTube was such a different content proposition that it was hard to really refer to it as very useful. So a lot of the early experiences were just inventing paradigms. You know, we didn't have existing paradigms to copy, so or to test or refer to. So we were just inventing different ways of navigating and experiencing content, which was quite exciting.
Fabian, does that ring true when you were working on the first iterations of iPlayer?
Yeah, yes. So I think what was interesting when we started working on the iPlayer, there were a lot of, I call them metaphors used, but what especially in hindsight, what was remarkable that TV wasn't a metaphor. I think there were a lot of references in the word of the digital, and the digital at the time was not, didn't really have any sort of meaningful examples of what an on-demand service could look like. So I think in terms of experimentation, I think that's maybe why there was this pretty long learning curve for TV to mature, in addition to obviously the technical constraints. that maybe there were a lot of examples being looked, but not like sort of the beauty of TV, which with all its sort of key characteristics.
What were the sort of initial thoughts about what customers, I mean, obviously it's an OTT service, customers are coming to look at content, yeah, but what were the sort of objectives around that? You know, did you consider, Steve, perhaps at the time, about content recommendation and surfacing content and personalization, or was it too early for that kind of thing?
It was talked about, but it seemed to be kind of quite early for that, really. You know, the main focus was to make the video work. You know, we you know, bandwidth and the kind of the sort of broadband kind of penetration that we've got today just wasn't there. So, you know, making sure the video worked and was able to play was kind of was primary. And then UX and UI was kind of quite separate, really, and kind of you know, was behind. No, it was more about kind of featured editorialized kind of content rather than kind of personalized and data driven and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. Tom mentioned Forde. I remember Forde being the browser application that you talked about there, Cos, where you download an application to sit on your browser rather.
Yeah, Kontiki app. Yeah.
It became this kind of. I remember kind of the revelation of it becoming a streaming app that was, you know, streaming video over the internet. I mean, I look back on those days now and think about how far we've come. I mean, I know we'll talk about this later, but kind of I think about, you know, live streaming event TV, like something like Love Island, where people turn up at 9 o'clock and press play and want a TV experience, as Fabian was just talking about. They want to be able to go, right, I'm here, I want a perfect video experience. And, you know, back then, we would never have been able to do anything like that, to be able to kind of deal with that level of traffic coming through concurrently. You know, it's a different world of kind of video back then compared to now.
The other brilliant thing with 4OD back then was that it launched with its entire catalogue, right? It came out with all Channel 4 programs that it had in its archive. So that was the first terrestrial broadcaster to launch in the UK, but also, I believe, the first terrestrial broadcaster in the world to launch with that much content, with all their content.
Well, it also had some film content that was not traditionally part of the Channel 4 archive, I wouldn't say, and so that I think picking up on both Steve and Fabian's point around the fact that this was, at the time, the term OTT wasn't really a phrase that was being used around that time. It was video on demand.
Yes.
And I think that is really reflective in the type of experiences that people were thinking about at that point. You know, the magic of television and the idea that you were just taking television and taking it over the top is not the way that people were thinking about it. People thought, right, you know, television and linear channels are the obstacle, and the reason that people use that form of experience is because we're limited by television. So if we create an on-demand application, people can just go in and take what they want. And that was the primary, you know, there was a lot of talk around the difference between a concession store and a supermarket, and what is the, you know, what are we aiming for? Are we aiming for a small kind of boutique-y experience, or are we aiming for a big supermarket type experience? And all of this was around the onus being on the user to go in and find what they're looking for, what they want to look for. I think, you know, as we did that project and we tested with users, it became apparent that there were a lot of things about TV that people liked. You know, not least all the thought that goes into what should be put on when, and that a lot of that was thrown out in the first generation of OTT. You know, by it was hard to stop that trend towards catalogue at that point. But I think, you know, and to be honest, I think we're still only just getting back there to that idea that, you know, some of the effort of finding content should be taken away from the user is something that we're still striving to get back to.
Is this one of the paradigms that you're talking about inventing at the time?
Yeah, I mean that idea that of saying, right, we're going to throw away television and create on demand was you know, initially exciting, and then as you tested, you're like, okay, well, maybe the 50-60 years of television has taught us a few things that aren't to be thrown out with the bathwater, you know.
Yeah. what are the differences between designing then versus designing now? I mean, let's talk about UI for now, yeah. But actually, no, let's not do that. Let's talk about UX, because obviously UX massively informs the UI, right? So what are the differences between all the thoughts that we had back then 15 years ago versus now?
I think there's one key thing, which is data and understanding, and being able to test and track, and being able to see how things are being used, and roll it out to kind of a small number of people, do an experiment with it, and be able to then kind of roll it out or roll back on it. I think that's the biggest thing. It's quite an obvious thing to kind of say, but I think that we didn't have that kind of benefit back then at all. There's a little bit of data coming back. We certainly didn't have kind of on the first stage of Forde, we didn't have a registered user kind of part to that. It was so we didn't really have any of the kind of stuff coming through on it. So that I think is the core difference now between then and now is that ability to kind of see how things are being used, put it out there, and then sort of then be able to kind of test it and then roll it out to kind of everybody else.
Yeah. Does it in all, because you were director of audience development at Channel 4 as well, right?
I looked after the CRM program at Channel 4 with when we went through the data strategy. Yeah, so yeah, we had the amount of data we had then compared to where we were the very beginning was enormous, and the power of that data that we got.
Well, that's what I was about to ask you actually. So what was it? What were the, let's say, some of the learnings that you got from looking at the data, from the analysis?
I mean, look, there's enormous amounts to it. Personalisation and recommendation was a big part of that, clearly. The ability for us to challenge different algorithms and different kind of ways of being able to sort of present content to viewers. The way that kind of user journeys and kind of how user journeys kind of can be tracked all the way through, and sort of you be able to see what results in a kind of very quick view versus a kind of long, elongated kind of user journey. So all of that type of kind of value that you get out of the data, and being able to track people through and see where you can kind of affect and get more incremental gains. From an advertising perspective, it was significant as well. And I don't just mean in terms of kind of the targeting, but I mean in terms of kind of being able to look at your yield and look at kind of the amount of kind of things, amount of advertising you could do against different kind of products and services. So I'd say data is the big difference.
Right, Fabian, what's your experience?
I think there's so many things have changed, and maybe worth deconstructing that a little bit. I think one of the key constraints that we always worked around a long time ago was around on the large screen was the TVs were really extremely poor performance. So anything from ability to do any motion to reaction times and so on and so forth. So all around, just on the basis of that, adoption was really low, because it was quite painful to actually turn the thing on and navigate to find the right thing and so on and so forth. So I think in terms of hardware, if we're at right now, we look at what TVs can do now, the large screen TVs, from voice control, from performance, all the aspects, it can actually really create a UI and a user experience which is on par with TV, with the same kind of motion characteristics, something that actually seamlessly dovetails in, and not like you turn the thing on, it feels like it's broken before you get to the TV experience. So that's number one in terms of a big difference. The second big difference is just the availability of content. What you could actually bring online for a number of reasons, which rights issues, service provider availability, and so on and so forth. The catalog was quite limited. And obviously the BBC being the first OTT service, sort of on some degree, sort of broke that mold a little bit. But if you look internationally, all around, it was a very limited catalog compared to what you have right now in terms of TV series and the content being produced. It's just mind-blowing, that difference right then and there. So that's a second big difference. Of course, data is a key driver behind the scenes to really sort of enable everything. But I think there's a lot in terms of usability, in particular on the big screen, that makes it much easier. The role of voice, the role of sort of the advances in input mechanisms, the advances of sort of how, if you think about how Netflix sort of seamlessly integrates trailers into their user experience, all those kind of things really make it a infinitely better experience. And this is because you can do that now. I mean, we had all those ideas back then, but we just couldn't do it. The technology just wasn't there. Yeah. And I think that was one of the key differences. You know, there were a lot of ideas back in the days that were focusing on everything but TV, because we were so focused on the technology, but they couldn't be delivered. So again, the exciting part today, many of the ideas are coming back and are sort of finding its way sort of slowly but surely into the user experience. Of course, that's primarily for the big screen. Now, on mobile devices, the story is entirely different, I think.
Well, let's talk about that, yeah, because Steve, you mentioned a phrase to me the other day when we were talking about input controls, which was a sort of ITV thing, touch, type, talk.
Yeah, we can. Yeah, the way we think about things is the touch, type, talk. So how do viewers on the web or on kind of connected TV, what is the user experience like for them? And as Fabian was just talking about, then there is a different paradigm. You know, you kind of the use on the web versus the use on connected TV, which is by far and away now the biggest platform in terms of kind of on-demand viewing, yes, as we know. But what's the experience like on each of those, and how is voice starting to change that, and how is what does the user experience need to be like, and how flexible does it need to be for voice? And you then start getting into kind of metadata area and making sure that your metadata is the best it can possibly be. And I think that as broadcaster VOD, our metadata is not in a very good state, or it hasn't been in a very good state. And I say that across all the different providers. You know, you look at kind of everyone as a BVOD provider, our metadata isn't the best it can be. And I think there's a lot of work we can do there, and we need to do it to be able to enable things like voice and make that a better experience. I think voice is quite interesting. I still think it's quite nascent and a bit too machine-like. You have to talk in a very machine kind of way. Alexa, from Spotify, play X playlist. I'm going to say, yeah, sorry. But you have to talk in that.
My Alexa's about to go off. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You have to talk in that very machine. They'll get it right because you got some, all the big brains from the West Coast kind of looking at it and starting to get better now. But it struggles with my northern accent. But we are constantly looking at kind of that touch, type and talk way of looking at kind of different UIs to be able to sort of make sure our content works well across all of them. And when we haven't got that right yet by any means, and there's work to do there.
Interestingly, I worked on a project for Netflix in 2015 on voice control. And we had an audience in, so we did some focus groups and some audience research. And at some point we had couples, as in, two partners coming in together and sitting on a couch, and we called them the Wizard of Oz experiments. So there was a television in front of them that had Netflix on it, labeled. And Jason Bradwell, if you remember Jason, who works at Delta Tray now, he was sitting sort of behind a curtain, actually, being Netflix. So this couple, we asked them to ask Netflix to do something in 3 ways. So first of all, very robotically say, Netflix, do this. Netflix, find me Game of Thrones season 3, episode 2. Yeah. And Netflix would not respond. It would simply just do what they wanted it to do. Yes, it followed the instruction. The sort of slightly nicer version of that is that the couple would issue the instruction, and Jason in the background would say, finding Game of Thrones season 3, episode 2. Yeah, and they liked that better. And then finally, the couple would say the same instruction, and Jason would actually start having a proper conversation with them, pretending to be Netflix. Yeah, and which one did they like most? And obviously, it was the last one. But as you say, it is still nascent.
Well, they'll get it right. Natural language is the thing that they need to be doing, and they've got loads of people kind of thinking and kind of thinking about how you translate into natural language into commands for kind of systems and things like that. So they will get that right.
Tom, are you building for voice?
At the moment, we haven't been doing an awful lot of building for voice, to be honest. I think, we've recently been doing a lot of sports work, and I think the focus there has been more on looking at content formats and where you can drill into a content format to actually start enhancing the experience of engagement through the user experience. And I think, a lot of the sports organisations are where the broadcasters were 5 years ago in terms of what they organizationally, how ready they are to actually start doing proper OTT. So you know, a lot of the challenges of working with those organizations is more about them, you know, moving from a place where they had no direct to consumer engagement at all to one where they want to try and compete with people like Sky in terms of the quality of the direct to consumer engagement that they have. And you know, making that leap is a big challenge for them. So they're still at kind of, I'd say, at an earlier stage in terms of what they're trying to the challenges they're trying to take on.
Yeah. Inevitably, Fabian, you mentioned Netflix and the trailers. Does anybody like that, by the way? The auto playing of the trailers?
We were talking about this the other day. Sorry, Fabian. Charles, you and I were talking about this the other day, weren't we? About it must work for them, because everybody I speak to doesn't like the auto play with the sound on. You know, it's kind of, oh gosh, I need to flick through very quickly to not get to it. But it must work for them. They're a very consumer and viewer orientated brand, so it must work for them. A
lot of the testing that we did on TV platforms, you know, years ago, the pressure of silence when you're navigating on a television, you know, I've talked to you about this before, Kaz, which is, you know, we designed on-demand paradigms for web and mobile and tablet, which are lean forward platforms where you want to interact, and so it kind of, although I don't like it, I think it works because there's high affordance for that kind of thing on those platforms. But what we then, and we lost a lot of the magic of TV. Then we put these paradigms onto televisions, and people have to start navigating televisions in an on-demand way. And you know, when we started testing those very early on, it was super clear that users did not feel comfortable sat in a sitting room environment trying to find something in a sort of browsing way. It felt wrong. You know, the TV being silent felt wrong. You know, and there's a lot of traditional TV behaviors around background watching and just turning it on and then using that as a start point to navigate away to something that you want to watch more than the thing that you're watching. And so I can see and I get the reasons for autoplay on Netflix, and personally, it has resulted in me watching things. So you know, and I think one of Netflix's challenges is getting people over the hurdle of just browsing into you know, and that sticking to the programs you're comfortable with and you've heard about and you want to watch and you've gone there to watch, to actually serendipitously discovering something through the browsing experience and going, yeah, right, you know, I'm going to give away half an hour or 45 minutes of my time to watch this thing I've never heard of. You know, the best way to do that is to just start playing it. And then, you know, there's a chance they'll get hooked and actually watch more of it.
Yeah. Fabian?
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely works. I think it's not perfect, needless to say, and I can imagine a few sort of tweaks to how it could be better, you know, ranging if you just have a better sort of data, better personalization engine behind it, or find a way to sort of easily quickly mute it or skip it. I think, but the idea, for all the reasons just being said, is a great idea, because this kind of silent browsing and leaning and learning and reading and trying to understand what's going on. A trailer is always still the best way to really give a taste of what content is going to be like. So I think it works, and I think you can easily sort of imagine if sort of quick fixes to the pain points that we just articulated to not make it annoying. And I personally never really find it annoying, to be honest, because I have the volume comfortably low when I actually am in browse mode.
Right.
I was a massive channel flicker on traditional TV, so you know, I'd end up watching 3 programs at the same time and just flicking between them when they got to bits that I was like, oh yeah, not really feeling this one. So like for me, Netflix, I find really you know, until it's now got a lot more trailers in it, I found it quite an uncomfortable experience, to be honest. And I there's a kind of famous Onion clip of the fake Netflix browse only mode, where you can spend all evening with your partner browsing and then just go back to watching your favorite show on telly. And there is an element of that with Netflix, which is it's not a particularly enjoyable experience trying to find a piece of content on a telly through a remote control.
But that's not that's not unique to Netflix. That's unique to that's sort of a pervasive problem of all VOD services.
Yeah.
Well, TiVo has TiVo and its quarterly video index reports, which aren't quarterly anymore. I should point out, so they're probably not called that anymore. And anyway, TiVo and I have a standing joke that I never remember what this report is actually called. But an interesting stat from it is that people do spend up to half an hour searching for content every time they turn on the TV before getting bored enough to actually switch it off or just go back to terrestrial, which just seems bonkers to me. But then I've done it. Yeah, I've ended up spending 45 minutes just sort of browsing on my tablet or on TV. On TV, it's particularly painful because you're using the remote control.
Yeah, we did a lot of work with Sky a while back, and they had a similar thing where people were churning away from the platform because they felt that they weren't getting enough content through their package. Yeah. And on the exit interview, they were being asked, okay, so if this content was available to you, and they listed out the content that was available to them, would you have considered staying? And they'd be like, oh, definitely. There's some great content in there. And so obviously the mechanism of browsing on a television can get in the way of people's awareness of what's actually available to them.
Now I should say to the audience actually that we've got about 18 or so minutes left. So look, if you have questions, then please do put them in the Q&A area at the bottom or in the chat area as well, and I'll get to those questions shortly. Netflix, inevitably we're going to talk about Netflix now in sort of a fairly big way. Now when it launched here in January 2012, I mean, I'm excited about these things anyway, but the things that it did bring to the table were a new massive catalogue of content, that wasn't previously available or had been, but in piecemeal form on other VOD services. But that it was also the sort of the UI and UX, the rails, which we didn't find so annoying back then, and also the personalization elements, because you watch this, you might like to watch that. How much did Netflix basically end the game as far as UIX is concerned? Is that where evolution pretty much stopped? Did all OTT services say, right, Netflix have done this, let's do that? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Netflix, so we had a few years where almost every conversation we had with a client or a prospective client was them saying, I want to be the Netflix of insert something that is completely different from Netflix here. So it was, we want to be the Netflix of Middle Eastern comedy, or we want to be the Netflix of pet television or something like that. And actually then having the conversation with them where you say, look, Netflix is what Netflix is because Netflix has the content offering that Netflix has. It is global. It's trying to be ubiquitous across all platforms. There are some very specific things about Netflix which make it Netflix. And I think what people often say when they're talking about Netflix is what they really mean is we want to be successful. We want to have a good product that works, and they mistake that for Rails. They think, oh, okay, so it's got to be Rails. I think one thing that people never really notice is Netflix has some really specific elements to its customer experience that are, it doesn't have destination pages for content. It's a flat, it's very shallow, very flat experience. If you have a small content catalog, you can't deliver a shallow and flat experience. It just doesn't really work. So, you have to provide justification for why you want things to, why you think people should watch things. You have to curate in a completely different way, and therefore the Netflix paradigm doesn't work for you. So I don't think personally that Netflix has in any way ended the development of it's been a really annoying thing in the development of these experiences, because everyone thinks they want to be Netflix. And so you do have to have this conversation repeatedly where you explain that, you know, actually Netflix is a very, very distinctive and specific experience and not relevant for a lot of other people.
So I think our take on Netflix is not only did a lot of our team that we had at the BBC migrate to Netflix in 2012, so we were quite intimately familiar with their workings, but I think all around their success, which did sort of create very homogenic, the risks sort of creating very homogenic or replicable solutions for any VOD service. I think for us, the argument has always been, yeah, I mean, as a baseline user experience is important, but anybody who wants to differentiate themselves out there, they can't duplicate, they need to make it an ownable experience. And that's not only about the UI, it's also in the content catalog, but it's also about how you create or what manifests your brand. What's your brand DNA? So, because I think that's one of the biggest risks in TV, that where you just focus on the rails and you just focus sort of on few really basic building blocks and say that whether that defines your business, then I think you're probably never really going to succeed in your business. It's like saying a car has wheels and 4 doors and a hood, and that's all a car needs. No car manufacturer would be successful. I mean, that's where it starts. So when we talk to our clients, it's always about sort of what do you stand for as a brand? How do you want to differentiate yourself? And how does it manifest itself in specific features as well as in your design language? And I think if you sort of dig a little bit deeper, there aren't actually all that many services out there that are exactly like Netflix, because there are video services that integrate live and on demand, which Netflix doesn't do. Yeah. There are services that are completely free, which Netflix isn't. There are services that are more like a platform that integrate different content formats. Again, Netflix doesn't do that. So I think the conversation might start, we want to be like Netflix, but usually the second conversation is not about that anymore, because a Netflix paradigm actually doesn't work for the specific business that you usually want to bring to market.
Steve, at ITV, have you ever internally said, we want to be more like Netflix or less like Netflix?
Every single day, yeah, that's said to me. I mean, look, look, Netflix is brilliant, isn't it? They've brought a fantastic product to market. That's kind of the benchmark for everybody, and everybody wants to be like them and have their features and their scale of audience, the scale of kind of content, and the amount of money that they spend on content as well. But what we find is very similar to what the guys are saying. Actually, is you do tend to have the highest paid person's opinion, the hippo within the kind of room, who will say, look, I want this feature because Netflix have got it. Now, just because Netflix have got something doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to work for your audience and also for your business model. They have a completely different business model to ITV. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that they do, and that's kind of what we're always trying to get back to all the time, is that, okay, there's an interesting idea. And again, it comes down to testing again to be able to understand whether that particular kind of feature or particular thing that Netflix has got will work and drive your metrics and drive what you want to be able to do. And I think it comes back down to that. And look, it's Rails are great. They allow you to kind of surface lots more content above the fold and get more kind of content on the home pages. But they're not the be all and end all. There's lots of other components that you can kind of bring into it as well.
What are those components for ITV Hub specifically?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
Caught out.
There's very similar. We're trying to at the moment. We are in the middle of a redesign of the hub. You'll have seen it rolled out on mobile devices earlier this year and on browser as well. We're in the midst of doing the same on connected TV, and there's a very rail orientated kind of feature set on that at the moment. We're using React. So we will bring a lot more other kind of components to it to be able to surface all kinds of different content and give a bit of differentiation from it being about long form. Maybe there's some kind of shorter form content that will be on there and other things that ITV wants to bring to people. So I think that the ubiquitous rail needs to be broken up with with other components and other shapes and sizes that kind of give a bit of differentiation and a bit of interest to the kind of UX anyway as well.
I'd just add on that, sorry, because I think one of the things that's interesting about, we've done a lot of work with broadcasters, as you know, from working on Forde and redesigned Forde 3 times, I think, and eventually turned it into all 4, and so also worked on iTV Player a lot and sort of over the in the past. And so I think the key thing was, initially, OTT platforms or VOD platforms for broadcasters were catch-up services. So, you know, it was about you missed something on the linear TV and you would go and find it on the iPlayer, for example. And I think we used to talk, the first version of iPlayer, the biggest triumph that they ever made was they marketed it well so that everybody understood what it was for. And when you click to play, the video played. From a user experience point of view, you could have provided a list of content because people knew what they were looking for. Do you know what I mean? And they went and found it. So I think what changed is, you know, after a couple of years of those catch-up services being in the market, people started going direct to those services to find content. And at that point, you've lost a lot of what the television did: continuity, marketing, kind of communication around what's upcoming, you know, that sort of stuff. And so, you know, at that point, most of the broadcasters had 2 services. They had their catch-up service and they had their program support service. And one of the things that obviously we did with all 4 at Channel 4 was go back to them and say, look, I think it's time that these 2 services became one thing. Like, that people are going straight to digital. They're missing a lot of the key stuff that you do on the channel that keeps them informed about your brand and about your content and makes them want to watch things. And when they go to the catch-up service, they're hitting a catalogue that doesn't do any of that stuff very well. So you need to bring the things that you do on the program support site in with the stuff that you do in terms of the long form video on demand content, and bring those together so that the digital experience helps to keep the brand and the sort of editorial voice of the broadcaster relevant. And I think, you know, that's why something like ITV Hub will have a variation of components from a user experience point of view, because it has to do way more. It's not just saying, here's a load of content, come and find what you want. It's got to make that content mean something. And I think I mentioned to you, like, when we were working with ITV a while back, we had these conversations, and one of the things that we came up with internally was the phrase, just fucking watch it. Because actually, on a Saturday night, X Factor is on. Don't start recommending people like archive content from 2 years ago. Just put X Factor at the top of the page. That's going to be successful. Like, that's what you want as a business. That's your priority. So don't try and go elsewhere. And I think that's I think particularly broadcasters, they spent way too long going down the let's be a tech platform, let's be a Netflix route, and actually stopped thinking about, to Fabian's point, what is our brand? What is it that is important about our content and the way we talk about our content? And I think they're only just sort of starting to get back that now, hopefully not too late.
Is there a difference as well? By the way, we are starting to get some questions through. Please do feel free to send them in. Is there a difference, by the way, in as much as VOD was born, or sorry, OTT was born into a linear world? Yeah, so if we were above the ages of, let's say, 15 or more in 2006-7, yeah, so it was Christmas Day 2007 when iPlayer launched, right? We were linear people who had to get used to OTT, whereas now there are kids who are growing up who've known only OTT. Yeah, on demand has become their sort of main way of watching content rather than linear. Yeah, does that change how we design products, OTT products as well? Fabian?
I think it helps the internal discussion, because I think very often there was this understanding that the user wouldn't get it, and that's why I think a lot of you know, when you had internal discussions about how to design it and what to go with, it was quite conservative. But I think now, because the user is sophisticated, they're used to it, their expectations have changed, their expectations have also changed by other services that they use. You can be much more willing to take risks, so to speak, and introduce new paradigms that might be new to TV than beforehand. You don't have to worry about that people don't get it. They will get it. So I think that is a primary difference.
Yeah.
I also want to highlight the one thing that's quite important, and and it's something we became mindful of when we did quite a bit of work in India on a variety of entertainment platforms. And one of the things that was interesting there was just the pace of working, as well as sort of the role of testing, because the sheer number of users that they have are so big, and the tech talent is so enormous, they can pretty much change everything extremely quickly. And they just launch stuff, and then they sort of adjust it as they go along, looking at the data and sort of doing slight variations. So it's a true sense of the word in evolution.
Yeah.
But I think it takes away a lot of the hesitation that I very often find that you have when you kind of debate what feature to launch, what to do, and then test your waters and test the proposition and then launch it. I think what we're going to see moving forward is a much more self-regulating, so to speak, product evolution, where I think it will evolve how users behave and what they like and what they don't like, as well as obviously with their changing preferences.
I'll get to the question. So the first one is that from Philip Redmond, who says, do the guys think that video products for kids require a separate or tailored UI and UX? That's an interesting question to me, because I remember studying lots of different VOD services and looking at their UI, because I used to have a product called the VUIX library, where I was literally cataloging those products. I remember the only ones that looked much different than the others were kids VOD services. So I remember Hopster being, a sort of nice, flowery, organic kind of environment that was adventurous in terms of helping kids find content. And then there was a French kids service called Gulli as well. I don't know if anybody had a look at that, which sort of had this sort of, do you remember the old iPods? Where you sort of did the wheel thing to be able to find songs. It had a similar wheel for finding televisual content. So going to Philip's question, do you think that video products for kids require a separate tailored UIX?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. We worked on a number of kids proposition in different markets in Portugal and Germany and the UK, as well as in the US and in India. And if I sort of can say sort of a few observations, the first one, obviously there's a quite sliding scale with kids. Kids at the age sort of below 6 are very different than from 6 to 9 and from 10 to 11. So there's a huge variation in it. We found that the best way to resolve it is essentially to bring the content to foreground, because the content is always optimized to the age group. There's a lot about the content that already does the work that you need to do to really adopt to the kids' experience. So bring that to the foreground. And then the second part, to go back to about the importance of brand. A lot of brands are obviously not geared towards kids. If you think, for instance, Netflix is too sophisticated for kids. So I think the key is to find a brand vocabulary which speaks to the audience, i.e. kids. Find a way to bring the content to foreground, and then essentially use all the best practices of basic user experience. I don't think the user experience necessarily is all that different for kids, because you really would want to create a user experience which is as simple as possible. And it should work for adults just as it does for kids. It shouldn't be any more complicated, right? But the brand and the content is different.
Tom, any thoughts on that? Because
no, I mean, we've worked on kids stuff, and I would agree with Fabian. I think the experience should be really not that different from the grown-up experience. I think the mechanisms that you use should be simple anyway, and certainly when we've worked testing like more kid-orientated design propositions and less kid-orientated design propositions, actually it's not long with kids that they start gravitating towards the more grown-up orientated design proposition anyway. So if your starting principle with your design is simple, then you shouldn't have to deviate too far from it in order to cater for kids. I think that there's some clear things like your character recognition and stuff like that obviously is stronger with kids than reading the name of the show. So that you need to think about that sort of thing. But I think in terms of the actual UI itself, it doesn't deviate enormously.
I have some memory. Is it of reading? Is it a Malcolm Gladwell or possibly an undercover economist sort of thing, where in the 70s, some research done in the States suggested that kids up to 5 years old wanted to watch the same episode of the same program, not just the same program, but the same episode of the same program up to 31 times or something before they got bored with it. And this was using Sesame Street as the research example.
No, I think that's very true. Films, kids will watch the same film over and over and over. And I think that's something that you need to bear in mind. I think also for a lot of kids services, it's the adult that's doing the browsing on the kids' behalf to begin with, and they get it started, and I think there's an acknowledgement with some of the kids services we work with that really the adult is, this is a guilty thing that the adult does, which is just putting the kid in front of something because they need an hour to go and cook dinner or whatever it is. And that what they need is that service to keep that kid entertained for an hour. And so things like autoplay, which obviously work well in other contexts as well, work really well with kids services because they, the content's shorter and they're not that discerning about watching one after the other. So that's also stuff that's worth considering.
My 4-year-old nephew loves his Alexa, and they just have conversations regularly, or at least he tries to have conversations with her. She's a bit less forthcoming. Steve, a question for you. I'd like to hear the panel. This is from Amy Wise. I'd like to hear the panel opinion on offering more content to show how large the content is, or offering less content but focused on the user. Which one would you choose if you had to pick one?
I now know who to blame because Tom's just admitted to the fact that he's the one who said go for the biggest show at the top of. For us, there's an interesting dilemma for us because especially when it comes to personalisation and things like that. And as Tom said, on BVOD services, and I would dare say on kind of other VOD services as well, most people come with a task in mind. They know what they want to watch, and the dilemma for us is. Do you make it as simple as possible for them to kind of get that program, or do you make it just slightly less simple and kind of promote something else there on one of the bigger slots to be able to say, here's kind of something else as you're passing through to know about it? Because part of our challenge is to grow breadth of interest. Because if they're just coming in to watch one program, then they're gonna go when it finishes. So we need to grow the breadth of interest to be able to sort of grow their kind of frequency, grow their session time, and keep them coming back regularly. So I think for us it's more of a kind of, I think we're trying to get more things above the fold to be able to kind of show people that there's more to ITV than just the sort of there's one program that you've come in for. Google at one point, because we were talking about this, Google at one point were going to launch a TV service, which was there was no UI, it was just entirely search based. I think it was back in 2012 sort of time, and it was a big furore at the time, saying, this is going to be amazing, it's going to revolutionise TV. And actually, it didn't come to that, and they've launched Android TV recently, and it's got a kind of beautiful UI to it. So I think it's for me, it's about kind of it's about getting that breadth of interest. Again, it comes back down to what your metrics are. If you've got kind of great engagement and you're getting loads of frequency and lots of people coming to discover new content all the time, then you can hone it down to kind of sort of maybe one or two kind of things when they arrive. I think if you're a service where you're not getting that kind of frequency and that kind of behaviour in terms of somebody coming for discovery, then you've got to enforce that discovery a little bit more.
Yeah,
and that can be done by the UI, or it can be done by both Tom and Fabian have talked about, trails and kind of some of the continuity items that you can put into it as well.
By the way, just remind us that ITV Hub now is gone back to catch up, and the archive has gone to BritBox.
Yeah, so ITV Hub is the Thursday catch up, and then when it's finished on ITV Hub, it then goes onto BritBox. We've got full series across the summer at the moment, so we've got an archive full series box set type of a thing on there at the moment. It's not the full box set because it doesn't have all the series on there, but it has the last series. So as part of a bit of a gift to viewers to say, look, the kind of with production of TV kind of down, there's less to watch. So actually, here's kind of all the stuff that you may have missed over the last kind of 6 months to be able to see.
Good. We've run over time. I always do this. I'm sorry about that, everyone. Have we all seen Ready Player One, by the way, on Amazon right now? I'm asking this because it's virtual reality, and I'm looking forward to seeing that becoming true one day and being able to watch TV inside an actual VR headset. I guess that's some years off. But when it comes, then we'll convene another panel to talk about it. I'd like to thank the panel, Fabian from WT12 Studios, Steve from ITV, and Tom from Ostmodern. Next time, we are going to be talking about the future of the BBC iPlayer. So I hope you can join us for that. The video for this session will be live next week. Thank you very much.